Dr. Stephanie Burns has devoted her life to understanding human behavior, particularly in the fields of adult learning and goal achievement. She spent years in action as a trainer, speaker, and author, and then she directed her energies to academic research, earning a PhD in her chosen field. This work has provided completely new insights into why otherwise successful adults stop taking action on important goals. Goals like making money, getting healthy, or winning athletic competitions. Dr. Burns has applied her methodologies to an extraordinary range of activities, including corporate management, natural horsemanship, and learning musical instruments. She's the author of several books, including Great Lies We Live By, and most recently, Move Closer, Stay Longer, a breakthrough study of fear and courage. Dr. Stephanie Burns, we've invited you to provide this essential piece in our program, which we're calling the Mindset for Success, because of your pioneering work in the research and the teachings around human behavior, learning, and goal achievement. Can you tell us first a little bit about that work and your background in this subject area?
I think there's been a long thread that's been going on in my life, certainly for over the last 30 years, that has always seemed to focus on how it is adults get where it is they say they want to go. Now, for me, I wasn't an outstanding learner in school. I was the kid who was typically bored, sitting in class taking copious amounts of notes that never made any sense. I was more the kid who wanted to be very active in learning. And so for me, when I came out of high school, the first thought I had was wanting to be a computer engineer, but I did not want to go sit for 4 or 6 more years in a university taking more notes, listening to lectures that didn't make any sense. So I looked for an alternative, and I actually started in the United States Army at 18 years old, being trained as a computer engineer. And in those days, very few women were accepted into the engineering fields. I was lucky. And what was unique about that learning experience for me that kind of probably set me on the whole path I'm on today is that for the very first time I was in a learning environment that supported my style of learning. Yes, there was time for sitting still and taking notes, but soon enough they'd say, why don't you get up? There's a computer over there. Tear it apart, put it back together again with 5 less pieces, And so for me, for the first time as a learner, I could get out of my chair, talk out loud. I could actively experiment. And the result of that was for the very first time in school, I graduated #1 in my class. Now, in the military here in America, when you graduate #1 in your class, oftentimes what happens is they make you a military instructor. So for me, becoming an instructor certainly wasn't on the path, and certainly working with adult learners was not necessarily something I had planned for, but by circumstance I was there. And the circumstance of the military probably sets the entire stage for how I've dealt with adult learners ever since. My first class of students were 40 men. Every single one of the men outranked me. They were all older than I was, and obviously they were physically much larger. So, of course, when a student would raise his hand and say, "Excuse me, Corporal Burns, but I don't know what that means, or I'm confused," well, I couldn't do what I'd seen my teachers do. I couldn't say things like, "Well, of course someone like you is going to be confused," or "if you'd stop talking in class," or "if you'd do your homework." See, I couldn't do any of those things. I had to stand at attention, salute the student, go to parade rest, and say, "Well, excuse me, could you tell me what I did personally to cause your confusion?" Now, when you ask a student what causes their confusion, interestingly, they tell you. And what I learned at 19 years old was that with adult learners, if you gave it to them another way with a different metaphor or example, presented it differently, invariably their confusion went away. And the result for me was learning that oftentimes adults come into classroom situations with skills as learners that are not necessarily adequate to support themselves, and if they don't get the support from the teacher or facilitator, then there's no hope. And there's a tremendous amount of failure with adults as learners in formal classrooms and informal study simply because they either aren't skilled themselves and they're not facilitated or prepared properly themselves. So for me, the Army was a very big movement. I went out and I became an engineer for many companies, but I then ended up at ABC Television in the early 80s, and I stood in front of a group. I'd been asked to teach computer literacy, and I thought, well, how easy could this be? I mean, this is only computer literacy. But what I confronted were a large number of senior managers there to learn to use technology, and I had an assumption that if you take otherwise smart, successful adults, which most people are who do learning courses like the one we're talking about, that they'll behave like smart learners in the classroom environment. I expected they'd raise a hand and ask a question, that they would take notes appropriately and properly, they would study well and rigorously. But of course what I found was that when you take otherwise successful adults, put them in a classroom, and ask them to learn, what they tend to do is they go back and behave like they were 6 or 7 years old in school. They rock on their chairs, they go to the bathroom 9 times more than it's physically possible to have to do. Of course, if they have a question, they don't want to raise their hand and ask because they don't want to be embarrassed in front of their peers or colleagues. So the ABC experience for me was absolutely critical. It opened my eyes to how ill-prepared adults are to go back into learning situations and take advantage of those. After that experience, I spent the next 4 years doing research in the area of human behavior, specifically focused on adult learning and motivation, also in the area of achievement. As a result of that, I started to test some methods and started to teach or re-educate adults into how to be more effective learners when they went back into learning situations, be those self-directed, things they were doing at home on their own, or back in formal classrooms. And for the last 15 or 20 years now, that work has been dominant in my life. I've continued to do research. I went off and did a PhD to solve some of the more difficult problems that I was encountering with adult learners. And so today I would be seen as someone who gets brought into organizations or into schools who has a high stake in the quality of learning that they're offering to their people. And so they may have excellent information, excellent content, but what is oftentimes missing is quality facilitation, be that facilitation being wrapped around, as we're doing here with an audio CD, or some sort of online facilitation event, or something face-to-face, but something that prepares the adult for what it is they're about to engage in so that they get and are able to take the best advantage. So that's a little bit about me. I've worked with hundreds of organizations doing this type of work in many different media, and I'm just happy to be here to be able to do that for this project now.
Thanks. Can you give me a couple of examples of how your methodologies have changed the results that people have obtained from their learning experiences?
Well, I mean, I suppose I can give you one now. I'm working with a very large organization dealing with natural horsemanship. They're a worldwide company. They have hundreds of thousands of students who want and desire to study natural horsemanship under the leader, Pat Pirelli. And, of course, this difficult situation is that, Pat has brilliant material around natural horsemanship, but his ability then to produce an educational program that actually facilitates that year-long, 2-year-long, 3-year-long learning process for someone who's sitting in their home who's got a horse out in the paddock was highly problematic. So someone like me comes in, and rather than having things like 100,000 people buy a homeschool program and only 15 or 20% actually completing it, now they're getting completion rates that, are above 90% simply because the learner is prepared and facilitated along the way. And this would be done for many, many organizations, be it leadership training, sales training, very task-oriented training, such as, reskilling on the computers. I worked with the banks down in Australia, where I've just come up from, getting them to get computer literacy or literacy with the Internet and really comfortable facilities for people. They had lots of courses to teach people about computers and technology, but the result oftentimes was that people were really not using it. They were abandoning the courses very early on. And even, I'll tell you what, some of the online courses that are there now in the e-learning area, the uptake of e-learning around the world has been very high, but the completion rates for learners is very low. I've just finished a contract with a client who bought a large number of licenses to skill their people with e-learning programs. The result was only 4% completion. And so my job, what I was brought in to do, was to prepare learners to be able to learn in an e-learning environment such that they could take better advantage of what it was they were being offered. So my work is so broad spectrum and spread across such a diverse range of clients and diverse interests that it's very hard to say this is the particular niche. It's almost any single person or group or organization who wants to see people legitimately learn, legitimately take away what it is they're offering as information and use it in their lives is likely someone who's going to give me a call at one point or another.
There are many skills required, of course, for wealth creation, both internal and external, that will be presented on this program. Why do we need this kind of preparation first? Why not get straight to the meat and potatoes of how to make money?
Well, I think, the proof's in the pudding. I mean, there are how many books and programs and products already on the market that deal with wealth creation, and yet we don't see a lot of people actively being able to uptake that knowledge and those skills in such a way that they're able to utilize it out in the marketplace. One of the things that intrigued me about this new program was the willingness of its producers to actually care about whether people heard the messages from those content experts, actually were able to study that material appropriately and rigorously in such a way that they could then be compelled to take action when they were back out in real-world situations. So I'm all for, people diving in and buying books. I mean, you have to get that the average adult in business today reads 11 or 12 pages of any given business book they buy. So they buy it with enthusiasm and excitement. They're all excited about the end goal that they may get, but of course they open the page, and once they realize the action they have to take, everything falls apart. And there's some very good science and biological reasons why adults procrastinate and avoid action. And one of the things that can be done is you can use someone like me to get people better prepared to be able to take advantage of the programs that you offer. So wealth creation, to me, requires knowledge, new knowledge. That means your brain has to know things it doesn't know now. And it also has to be able to do new things that it can't do now. And for me, the measure that learning has occurred, which is, a benchmark in my world, but very rarely a benchmark in any programs I've seen out there in this area, is number one, that the student can, at the end, talk about it articulately in a casual conversation. How you know you've learned something is if you can sit around the dinner table and talk about those concepts and ideas, again, articulately and casually, without notes and without having to think. That's how deep the knowledge learning has to be. And skills have to be installed so deeply that you can execute them without thinking that there's been a genuine change in behavior. So for me, with wealth creation being skill-based and knowledge-based, this product's promise is that people will leave having studied it intelligently as a good adult learner, effectively as an adult learner, such that they own the knowledge in a way that they can talk about it casually and they can genuinely use it in their everyday behavior without having to think about it.
It's striking to me that the special focus of Trump University, with the guidance of Professor Roger Schank as the Chief Learning Officer, is what we call learning by doing. And it seems that what you're saying is that it's in the doing area that learning often breaks down. Why is this? Why is it that we will buy a tape set like this or a CD set, or we'll read a book, we'll get excited, we'll see the vision, but then we fail to really follow through? What's going on here?
Well, that's an interesting human behavior question, and it's actually what drove me to do my PhD. Here's a little setup for this, and then I'll give you an idea of the kinds of things that cause this breakdown to happen quite naturally. When I was teaching people how to learn more effectively, my assumption, an almost naive assumption, was that if you gave people skills to be effective learners such that they knew for a fact that if they wanted it, they had the goal, they wanted to achieve it, they could do that without question. My assumption was if you gave people skills at that level, then they would go do what they want to do in their life. They'd go back to school, or they'd get a pilot's license, or they'd learn to play guitar, or whatever the case may be. And I started to do some research, and what I found was that when you take adults, or when I found my adults going out self-selecting very important goals, like dealing with wealth creation, for example, by and large, and we're talking very large, 75 to 85% of all the surveys and studies we did showed that adults, after having selected a goal like that, failed to achieve it. And when I started to see that, I thought, my goodness, 75 to 85% of the adults self-selecting important professional and personal goals are failing to achieve them. That's a really interesting thing to look at. And what was interesting is, number one, the size of the problem. It says that it's more normal for us to fail to achieve a goal than it is for us to achieve a goal. So it says you're being normal if you fail, you're being exceptional or extraordinary if you achieve. There was a lot of resistance to that thinking. I don't think anyone had really started to consider that it's actually normal to quit and it's actually exceptional to continue. So given my background in human behavior and very much coming from a biology and kind of a brain science perspective, I started to look at that number and say the only way it can be that big and it can be such that it's a normal effect. It says that something inherent in our behavior moves us away from taking action. So I had my subjects in my PhD research, and they all had personal and professional goals that they were looking to pursue. And we tracked those people over time, and we had them report on what their experience was of learning during that time. So let's say they wanted to learn 3 songs on the guitar. They wanted to read all the books of a professional that they admired. So they had these goals, and we set them off to go about it. And sure enough, 75 to 85% of them eventually quit. But what was very interesting was the analysis of their reports about their experience. We found one thing that was very interesting. We found that better than 90% of the time when adults describe how they feel when they're learning, how they feel when they're reading, how they feel when they're doing their typing tutor practice, we get a negative effect. They get a negative response. That means they're bored, confused, frustrated, or physically distressed. They've got butterflies in their stomach, or they're upset about something, or they get a headache. So what we found was that there was a large number of negative effect when adults took action needed for learning. So let's face it, if you're going typing tutor practice and you keep getting beep, 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 error, 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 go slower, I've seen people throw computers against the wall. They're frustrated. Now, that means this. Humans, biologically, when they are under distress, their brain is going to go do whatever it takes to help, to kind of get them out of that distress. Now, in learning, the single fastest way your brain can help you stop being distressed is to get you to stop doing whatever you're doing. So if you stop your typing tutor practice, all of a sudden the stress goes away. If you're reading a book that's very boring, it's not well written, and it's confusing, or it's making you feel anxious, the single fastest way that you can feel better in that moment is to stop reading. So here we go. So now we're going to give adults, in this case, a series of audio CDs by content experts. They're going to have a series of activities perhaps that they'll go off and do in their real world situation. And what will tend to happen is that as people get excited about the product, and therefore they're motivated through the positive idea of it to buy it, once the reality comes of opening up the package and putting the first CD in and then listening to it and then having to study it and perhaps taking notes from it and perhaps having to review it and then go use it, most of those activities are just not fun. It's not that they're terrible. They're just not, it's not particularly fun to go do things that are new and feel discomforting. So human beings have a natural tendency to avoid or procrastinate around things that bring on discomfort. In order for people to do things that are discomforting, they must have a kind of mindset or a mental strategy that says being bored is not a good enough reason to stop. Being confused is normal and natural in learning, and it's okay. Feeling frustrated is temporary, for example, is only going to last for a short time until I get to the end of the book. If you don't have a strategy that makes feeling bad okay, you will abandon almost any learning goal you set.
Let me understand you clearly here. It seems from what you were saying, I was expecting you to suggest that we need to make learning always fun and pleasurable. But that doesn't seem to be where you're taking this.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, as a matter of fact, there's been a good 25-year history through the whole personal development kind of new age genre of teaching that's had this almost mantra that says if learning isn't fun, then, it's not occurring. Well, I would challenge anyone listening to this, to your CD to think about the significant and important things that they've learned in their lifetime and really reflect on what that process was. In most cases, it's something that was challenging. It was something that was fraught with anxiety at various times. And typically there was a teacher or somebody there that helped facilitate you, that kind of got you to stick with it long enough to get the result. The idea that learning is fun or trying to make it fun, the only way you can do that is if you water down the material so much so that it no longer has any meaning. That would be like saying taking a 400-page fantastic book, the best book in the world on leadership, and because we want to make it fun and we don't believe adults will read, what we do is we break it down into a little one-page cheat sheet or 5 PowerPoint slides on a computer, and we go, here's the 3 keys to leadership. So the notion of making learning fun is that we kill off the whole opportunity to learn. My message is learning that's rigorous needs to be big, needs to be what it is. You have to study, you have to work, but you have to have a tolerance for doing that.
I'm aware that you've done some work in the very different field of teaching a musical instrument, and I know from personal experience, and I think anybody who's tried to learn the guitar or the piano or the flute, what an immense struggle and frustration it is when the strange squeaky sounds come out of the instrument, so different
Absolutely.
from what you're imagining should be there. Tell me a little bit about how this applies in the example of learning a musical instrument.
Well, the music was a very interesting thing for me. I had very little exposure to playing and was one of those adults who had a great desire. And I just finished all the work on how could adults become more effective as learners as a project. And so I had all of these strategies, and I thought, geez, I need to see if this actually can be applied to something complex. What can I use? And I thought, well, I'll choose some musical instruments. So I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I went to a very famous pianist who was teaching at that time, and I said, here's my goal. I, as an adult, knowing what I know about learning, want to see if I can accelerate the speed at which adults learn to play a musical instrument. At which time she said to me, she said, don't worry, only the first 6 years are tough. At which time I thought, who on the planet can tolerate feeling bad and sounding bad for 6 years in order to finally have that moment of breakthrough when you like how you sound? So that made it for me a perfect project, and the result of that was I did 6 years of private tuition in 6 months' time. I loved how I sounded. I would probably never have been a great pianist, but I certainly got to the stage where I enjoyed what I was doing, I could do what I was doing repeatedly, and I could probably do that forever. Well, of course, I started to get a lot of attention around the results I had produced, but not so much from a learning perspective, but from the fact that everybody I knew wanted to learn to play a musical instrument. And at this time, I'd moved down to Australia, and I started to, I had a few articles that had come out about the music, and I got hundreds of letters, and people saying, oh, I've always dreamed of playing a musical instrument. Can you do something? Well, I only played piano at the time, and I thought, well, I'm certainly not very good teaching one-on-one, and I can't get 50 pianos in the classroom to do this project. So ultimately, long story short, someone suggested I change instruments, and, me being me, that's exactly what I did. I hired 2 great guitarists. I transferred all my skills over to playing guitar, and I started to produce a 6-month-long program called Learning to Learn Guitar, embedded in which, yes, they were there to learn guitar, but embedded in that program were all the strategies I knew about how adults could take control and charge of their own learning environment. So yes, they learned to play guitar as a result of the program, but even more than that, they learned how to control their continuous improvement or any other studies they chose to do on into the future because we had given them all those learning strategies. So the kind of stuff I teach is basically there to support learners becoming their own best teacher so that in all future endeavors they can use those skills and strategies to achieve whatever it is they're trying to set out to achieve.
So let's talk about these strategies. We've established that learning can be uncomfortable, there can be an aversion to it, there can be a feeling, I want to stop. What are some of the ways that we can overcome those biologically inherent obstacles to learning?
Well, that's great. I mean, it's great that you asked that. And amazingly, what's interesting about that is that people actually do this. They actually have these strategies embedded in them already. And I would say this, anything you do that's something you don't enjoy, be it finding parking to go pick up the dry cleaning, to reading hundreds of emails each day to do your job, or having a confronting phone call with someone, whatever you now do that's uncomfortable, you will use one of 3 cognitive or mental mindset strategies. Once you know what you do, then those 3 same strategies you can use or learn to use and apply to anything else. I'll give the 3 of them to you here in a short frame, and I don't know that it's going to help you go execute them, but nonetheless, this is the way you would get things done. Number 1, people who successfully do things that don't feel comfortable don't think about it in advance. One of the worst questions you can ask yourself before sitting down to study or listen to an audio CD or go do a task, the worst question you can ask is, do I feel like doing it? Because as soon as you ask the question, do I feel like taking out the garbage, then your brain's going to go into a full visual, full body experience of what it's like to take out the garbage. And of course the answer is going to come back and say no. So if you say, I'm sitting there watching football on Sunday afternoon and I ask the question, do I feel like reading my business wealth creation book? Well, my brain's going to imagine getting up from the football game, going and sitting around the table, opening up a textbook and reading. And I'm going to tell you the answer is probably going to be no. Therefore, you won't do it. You won't move toward it. So one of the strategies we use for doing things that are uncomfortable is we don't think about it in advance of doing it. We just do it. And I think, the greatest icon of the next century will be Nike. The Just Do It symbol is an amazing connection to human behavior that accurately represents how many people get things done. The second strategy that we already use to do things that are uncomfortable but could apply to anything is that we do think about it, but we think about it specifically. For example, if I commit to get up tomorrow morning to go for a jog, let's say, or a run, and I were to lie in bed and go, and I'm all warm and toasty and it's cold and wet out, and I go, do I feel like going for a jog? Obviously, forget it. I'm not going to get that done. But what if I start to think about how good it feels to have done it? Or how good I always feel 10 minutes after I start running in the morning? If I do think, but I specifically pick a time when I'm going to feel either very good or really bad for not having done it, then I'm going to probably be far more motivated to get up to achieve the positive result or avoid the negative result. For example, I would say that many, many people, if they tell someone that they're going to do something, then what they set up is they set up that system. So let's say you tell your boss or your spouse that you're going to learn how to touch type. You've got a far better chance of getting that done because you will tend to do it whether you like it or not, simply to avoid having to say when your boss asks you, have you done your typing tutor practice today? To avoid the question or the answer of saying, no, I didn't do that. Well, that would emotionally feel so negative that it's actually easier then to do the typing tutor. So the second strategy is you do think, but you think about a more positive result or a more negative consequence for not doing it. This is like 11th hour wonders do this. People say, I'm far better in the 11th hour. I get things done in the very last minute. And then, of course, they go on to convince themselves that that's actually a really good strategy for them. Well, I'm going to tell you, there's very few jobs in the world that actually benefit from the 11th hour phenomenon. What happens is, if they've got a report to write 3 weeks in advance, and they ask, do I feel like writing it? Of course, the answer is no, because there's nothing really consequential. When they get very close to the time in which it's going to be expected, or in which failing to produce it will feel bad, all of a sudden they find themselves overriding that negative feeling of starting the report, and they kick into gear and get it done. The third one is to just start, is to get in motion. Human beings are absolutely terrible at changing direction. So if you plan to go for a run tonight, but you come home and sit on the couch first, it's going to be very hard to get off the couch. We conserve energy and therefore don't change direction. So the third big strategy is to just start and commit to do it for a short time. Like, if you've been committing to put some time in reading, then it's a matter of saying, I'm going to just start. I'm going to do it for 10 minutes. If at the end of 10 minutes I don't feel like continuing, then I'll stop. At least you've got 10 minutes more done. Amazingly, adults will find that if they start to move in a new direction, it's actually very hard then to change. So if they start to read, they will actually tend to keep going as opposed to closing the book, getting up and going off and doing something else. This works for all kinds of things that people procrastinate on, even getting all the niggly emails out of their email box to handling difficult tasks. Most successful people I know who use these strategies that have learned these from me in various means will do all of the things that annoy them or bother them or are difficult very first thing in the morning. They just get in, get the job done, get out of there, then the rest of the day feels free to be doing the things that they really enjoy. So again, don't think, do think, just start. Those would be the three.
If I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is just as the obstacle to learning and achievement is inherent and built into the human form, so are the solutions. These strategies are strategies that we already know. And I guess somebody like Donald Trump, who's achieved amazing results in his life, has intuitively tapped into just those kind of strategies.
Absolutely. I have no doubt if we were talking to him now, he would have wonderful ideas, or be very, very conscious of what he doesn't tolerate to get in his way of action. Like, being hard isn't a reason not to do it. He would understand that getting a start is the most critical action that you take, that it's easier to sustain an action than it is to actually initiate it. These things he's clearly doing in his everyday life and practice in his business. How much he could articulate that is another question. He would only need to articulate those if he wanted to teach those to other members of his business community. But he clearly operates out of that. So something in his life gave him this set of strategies. Now, I'd venture to say that people who possess these strategies and use them in a bigger spectrum of life, not just to walk the dog and feed the children and take the rubbish out, like not in that context. Most of us use them for these small things. But people like him who use them in these larger, broader contexts in life typically were very much influenced by people like this when they were younger. For example, if you have children or you were a child and you didn't like doing math, let's say, because you found it difficult, frustrating, it was very confusing and made you cry and all upset. If you had a parent who said, oh, well, leave it alone, math isn't all that important, or save it until later, or, somehow alleviated that stress, then the message for you is that anytime you feel discomfort, you should alleviate that stress by doing something else. And there are parents who, just by not knowing, try to save their children from learning that life and important things do not feel good in the time you're doing them. When they feel good is when they're done. The reason we do 4 and 5 and 6 year university studies is not because they're fun to do, but because they're great to have done in your past for the benefits they give you now. Now, if you as a child didn't like your homework and it was math and your parents basically said, listen, it's the hardest stuff you have to do, so use your best brains to get in and get that done first, or you're not going to be unconfused, or you're not going to have clarity unless you study, or they said something like, confusion is just a normal part, and if you study hard in a couple of weeks, you'll find this stuff starts to come. If you took that on board, then you become someone like a Donald Trump or other successful business people. And by the way, these people cannot fathom why someone would quit reading a book because they're bored, or why they'd quit reading a book because it's confusing. That just would not make any sense to them, because in their life, confusion, frustration, anxiety, risk-taking, etc., is all a normal part of the trade of living life hard in moments for the benefits it provides later.
If I'm hearing you right, you're saying that even if you haven't been brought up by a parent like Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father, you can access these strategies later in life.
Yeah, absolutely, no question about it. I mean, it wouldn't have been fun to discover all this through the PhD, and it would have been really irresponsible, probably is more to the point, to not then have gone out and said, can we now teach these strategies to adults successfully, meaning can we add these to their behavioral set? The last 7 years of my career has been dedicated to exactly doing that, and that started by being done in face-to-face events. We did a program called the Goal Achievers Program, where people spent 3 months with me 1 day a week. They were working on their own goals, and what I was practicing doing was saying, how can I influence the behavior of adults around achievement by not giving them these 3 strategies. You can talk about them easily, but how do they wake up in the morning and actually make the decision to get out of bed and go to the pool when it's cold and they're going to get kicked in the head by somebody for the benefit of their health, rather than roll over and stay in bed? Like, installing that as part of your natural instinctive behavior that you use without thinking is a great challenge in education and learning. And so I started doing live events. I've used that as a framework for a recent book I wrote on fear, on overcoming fear. And I do it as an online course now. I have a course that runs, for 5 weeks that teaches, it just doesn't teach the strategy, it installs it in people's behavior, and it allows them to go then apply that to all the things that are important to them in their life. So most definitely we've shown that adults can be it's not so much re-educated as we can give them new ways of behaving that better support what it is they're trying to do.
Clearly, these strategies need practice, and a lot of practice over time. Can you give us some clues of how that practice might simply begin? What are some first steps that we could take?
Well, they actually don't take a lot of practice, these, because they, again, are things that we're already doing. Like anything you do now that you don't like doing, you use one of those strategies, one or more of them, actually. You know, if you're someone who's good about getting the rubbish out the night before, then you use these strategies. If you're someone who runs after the truck every week, well, clearly you're not. So because adults already have these there, the bigger process is getting them to be aware of them. So a lot of my work is cleverly sending them off on real-life missions or into real-life activities where they start to become acutely aware of their own behavior of when they have success with these strategies and in what context they fail to even recognize that those strategies can be used. So it's more a matter of kind of giving them an experience and then lifting it up so they understand that experience in a new way and then giving them some opportunities to practice and apply that. Now, most adults, most learners, period, even children, as soon as they have a better choice, meaning something creates a more positive feeling or a better success, they will use that strategy above all others for the rest of their days. So there's a really interesting thing in learning that says the only time you have to do repeated behaviors in order to install something new is if it's going to be something that, again, is arduous, difficult, frustrating, confusing. But when you give somebody a strategy that's actually demonstrably and with evidence producing a better result for them every day, like meaning they have more free time in a day, they're making more money, they have less stress, they're spending more time with their children, whatever the case may be, as soon as you give them something that produces that big a positive effect, they will use that from then on. So we find it doesn't take a lot to install it, but it takes a very clever little teaching kind of phenomena that has to be set up in order for them to get there.
And one part of that, if I'm hearing you right, is to develop the capacity for self-observation, to notice what works and what doesn't, and what it feels like.
Yes, because we facilitate these learning events, meaning that they're actually in the hands of, some clever facilitation, meaning the students in these programs actually get to be students. They're not in charge really of that learning process. The teaching mechanisms are in charge of that learning process. So what they need to be able to do or willing to do is they have to be able to do what they're told or be directed by the facilitation and without thinking. So they have to, if they're directed to go off and think or sit on a bench for 10 minutes and think about something, what's important is that they go do that. They don't have to self-observe in the sense that they have to be highly self-reflective or they have to learn the skill of self-observation. The teaching and the facilitation drives them to do that appropriately and at the appropriate moments in the course.
So, for example, when we come to an action step in this program, perhaps it's Diane Kennedy saying, go draw up a financial statement, which could be kind of an uncomfortable process because you're going to look at your assets, you're going to also look at your liabilities, and you're going to take a reality check on your financial life. If we apply the strategies you're describing to such an action, it seems that you're suggesting we draw on things we really know how to do that we have applied in other life situations, such as just make a start now. Don't think about what it's going to feel like to do that. Think about the consequences of not doing it, which could be to go broke, or the positive consequences of doing it, which would be to get on the path to creating wealth.
Absolutely, no question. You've nailed it right there. People will be given tasks and actions. Their natural propensity will be to not take those actions. Please know that, one of the things that happens when adults are learning is that their brain is really in there serving them. So let's say they're doing this collectively with a group of friends. Everyone is going off to do the Diane Kennedy task, and you're sitting at home not wanting to do that task. Now, the game is that if you don't do it, you're going to feel guilty because other people are going to know. But what happens when you're working all by yourself? Well, people have a lot of self-loathing. They have labels for themselves. They call themselves procrastinators. They'll say, well, I have no willpower. They do something that blames themselves, but at the same time justifies the behavior. Now, if they can justify why they're not doing something, like their children are sick and need them today, or today's not a good day because they're busy at the office, if they can find some good rational reason for why they're not going to do that financial statement or look at the task that Diane has set for them, then they're going to get off the hook. As soon as they can let go of feeling guilty about not doing it, they're going to not do it. And what their brain is doing when it gives them those rationalizations and excuses is it's actually making them feel good. If I can lie in bed in the morning and justify why I'm not going to go for a run that day, and it sounds logical to me and legitimate, like I convince myself I'll really do it tonight, even though I've never done it at night. But if I can convince myself of that, then I relieve the stress, I feel positive, and I can stay in bed and not feel guilty about not going for the run or not doing my homework or not following through on an action. So the proof will be in the pudding. Do people's behaviors change in the area of wealth creation? The only way that's going to happen is obviously for them to take those actions, and they're going to need the appropriate amount of understanding about their own behavior to do that.
One of the areas you've written about in your book, Great Lies We Live By, is the beliefs that we hold about ourselves that obstruct our action and our forward movement. You've touched on this already in this conversation, but perhaps you could unpack that a little further.
Sure. I mean, we get raised in an education system that kind of has some resulting ideas or leaves us with some resulting ideas about ourselves as learners. I've had hundreds of thousands of students, and most of those I've had at least some sort of contact with where they can illuminate for me some of those things. Now, people perceive themselves as either not being smart or being too old or being too slow. They already can tell you 100 things that they're not very good at. It's very difficult to get adults oftentimes to tell you what they are good at, but they can list certainly their detriments very quickly. They have beliefs that they hold to be true about their abilities around reading or studying or concentration. It's very rare for me to meet an adult who's coming into a learning situation that does not kind of put forth already their story about the things they believe to be true that they feel I should know. Like, I should know that they are not technically competent. I should know that they don't type well. I should know. Then they're trying to almost like prepare me for their kind of beliefs about, what's going to happen here. Now, my goal, obviously, in job is to get them off of that long enough for them to have a different experience of themselves. So adult learners have beliefs about themselves, and they use those stories to actually defend themselves against possible failure, possible humiliation. Again, here they are, moderating their emotional experience again. They're trying to make themselves feel good or at least have a lessened risk. I'll give you a great example. There are people who set themselves up for failing by not studying. And you go, well, why would you not study and cause yourself to fail? Because emotionally it's riskier for them to study and fail, meaning I worked hard and I still failed, than to fail because I didn't work at it at all. So there are some people and their children in school who literally won't do homework because at least when they fail, they can say, I didn't do my homework, which is much safer than saying I did my homework and studied really hard and I failed. Like that for them is much more emotionally risky. So adults have those kind of beliefs, but they also have beliefs or myths about learning. I mean, adults have this notion that somehow learning just happens, even though they don't, their experience isn't that. But they hold this belief that if I read this book, then I'm just going to know something. They have an interesting belief that they should remember what they read. It's amazing how many people say, well, reading's really frustrating for me because I never remember any of it. But what you have to know is there is nothing, not one thing in the act of reading that makes information memorable. Reading is not a memory activity. So if you want to remember what you read, you have to do something about that. You have to apply study strategies that make the information memorable. So again, they run around with myths about learning and about themselves. So these are things that need to be and adults are very easy to work with on this because they have very rich lives. Most are successful in their world, be it personally or professionally. It's very easy for adults to be kind of directed to lift better ideas or better beliefs or better truths out of their experience, but it takes someone to guide them to do that.
Dr. Burns, you mentioned your recent book on the subject of fear, and that's an interesting topic in relation to this subject matter. Let me give you one example. I know that Dolph DeRoos, when he introduces the story of investment in real estate, is likely to encourage our listeners to, at some point, go out there, look for properties, and even make an offer on a property. And classically, that's a huge moment of fear for many people when they make their first offer on a real estate investment, even when there's all sorts of safety nets built in.
Yep.
Tell me about fear, courage, and how we get through that particular obstacle.
Yeah, it's interesting. Fear is, when I did the studies around kind of the emotional experience of adult learners, which is where we started to learn about how adults were falling off the cliff with taking action, fear was just one of the set, so we had fear and anxiety, and we also had frustration and anger and, the whole set. But the more and more I started to present that work out in the world, we found that fear was a major issue, meaning it seemed to almost be an entity of its own self that needed to be addressed specifically and uniquely. It's the same as the other negative emotions in that when what we do causes a fear response, be that mentally we start to get anxious or ruminate or think bad thoughts, or physical, we get butterflies in our stomach, etc., we still have that same natural propensity for the brain to go into kind of an overdrive going, oh my God, my human's under risk here, I've got to save it. And of course how it does that is it gets you to move away from whatever it is you're doing. And of course, in the evolutionary scheme of things, that's been a pretty important strategy for survival of humans. But when it comes to a modern-day society where we're not threatened very much, the reality is that making a confrontational phone call is not going to kill you. But nonetheless, your brain doesn't know that. So if you go under tremendous stress and anxiousness with, increased heart rate, et cetera, around making that phone call, your brain's going to do anything it can to get you to stop. So obviously that relates to, some of the activities that people in the program now may be suggested to do. So first, it is natural. But when we're dealing with fear is it's critical because the effect in the body and brain is so profound. It's not like a little frustration or a little irritation when we're, making mistakes or we feel confused. It's a full body experience that's very vibrant and very hard for people to ignore. It's why people don't ask for raises. It's why they don't want to stand up and present in a way that might get them better noticed on their job. It's why people won't stand up and give presentations, or it's why sometimes people won't even go and do a university course because they don't want to have to take a test. So fear undermines and sits on the road of almost any significant goal that an adult has that requires some sort of learning. So having kind of been, looked at that, or having had many people ask me if I would look at that specifically, I started to look at the strategies that we already had of, don't think, do think, and just start. And oftentimes those three strategies were not strong enough to initiate the action, meaning they were just, they're great ideas, but you needed almost a bit of resilience. So I started to look at how animals and humans can successfully start to neutralize the size of the fear effect. So, for example, let's say I've got a fear of riding a horse, or let's say I have a fear of being around the back end of a horse for being kicked. Well, the things I'm going to want to know about that is, that fear can be so great that I'll sit on my couch and watch TV as opposed to going anywhere near my horse. The game starts to become, how close can I get to my horse before I start to feel that effect coming on? And by feel it, I mean literally my mind starts to go a bit crazy about fear and risk, and my body has this very strong physical reaction. How close can I get before I feel that sensation happening? And then the game becomes, how long can I, as soon as I get that little first edge of onset, then how long can I stay there, and can I stay there long enough for that feeling to change a little, meaning maybe, if not neutralize completely, certainly be lessened. Then I can move away, then I can approach. So this is a very basic approach and retreat. Now, when you're dealing with adults who are doing things like standing up to give presentations, or who might need to go, in fact, put a bid in on a real estate, and like you said, there's tremendous safety nets, but their brain and body doesn't know that. I mean, it's clearly not calculating that. So when they're starting to have a fear response, the game starts to become, how close can I get to doing it? If I can't go place a bid on a property, can I go sit in the room where that's happening? Can I watch other people do it? How close can I get before I feel the feeling? And then can I stay there long enough for my brain to sort out that there really isn't any danger there? And slowly, over a very short time, usually people using that kind of strategy get closer and closer and closer before they get the onset of fear, and they can stay longer and longer and longer to neutralize the effect. So when I did this work, I named the book Move Closer, Stay Longer, and I called that a bravery strategy. Now, it's not bravery like John Wayne said, feeling being scared to death and getting on anyway, getting on the horse anyway. That's insanity. And bravery is not about, and courage is not about going out and risking everything and putting your life, finances, relationships, etc. at risk. What bravery is it's a strategy. It's your ability to say, how close can I get, how long can I stay till the feeling changes, and then how close can I get next time, and how long can I stay till the feeling changes. And before you know it, your brain has sorted out what is and isn't genuinely frightening or scary to the point where you can start to take some constructive action.
That seems very clear. Let's look at one other obstruction that I believe may come up for some people. And that's what we might call the second time around. It's a very specific experience when you've done something, you've attempted something before, and your memory of the failure of that just makes this time around 100 times more daunting. Whether it's the fear factor, the frustration factor, the expectation, if it doesn't really matter, there's something about that going back again into a project where you didn't have success before.
Yes, I agree. And it's funny because that second time phenomenon has really not been very well accounted for anywhere. But it's a true effect. It's one thing to get yourself to do something once. That's a big deal. It's quite another thing, and even bigger, to get you to do it a second time. And I will always say that until you've done something a second time, you actually don't know if you're going to do it for a lifetime. You can ask people who have jumped out of airplanes. They go parachuting, and they, for whatever reason, they're able to get themselves to do that the first time. But it's amazing how few people actually go back and do it the second time. And when you study those people, what you find is that even though they survived, it's interesting that the first time you do something, you don't know anything. So you're usually trusting other people. You don't know how to interpret the information you have. And so there's this big unknown factor. So the first time you do something, you're confronting a kind of a lack of familiarity. So you don't know what's happening. Of course, the second time you do it, now you know full well what's happening. You know how things work, you know how nerve-wracking it is, you know how long something's going to take, you know how painful it might be. So oftentimes what makes the second event more difficult is now you have conscious awareness of the actual process you're going to go through. And if that process has a lot of things that are negative, be it, like you said, fear or physical pain or discomfort or frustration, then you are absolutely set up for your brain to come in and rescue you. And again, how is it going to rescue you? It's going to jump in and figure out some way to get you to not do it that second time. So you got one phenomena to do something first, you got a whole nother set of strategies or a whole nother size of the effect when you go to do something a second time. Typically, once you've done something the second time, your brain has kind of now sorted itself out. It knows how to do it with awareness, with knowledge of the sensation or feeling of it. It now knows that, and it will have a much easier time now starting to do that repeatedly.
So can you give me some kind of strategy for addressing this particular hurdle?
Don't think. As easy as said. I mean, I've worked with a good number of Olympic athletes, and it's amazing how much we perceive Olympic athletes as loving what they do. I work with track athletes as well as Taekwondo martial artists, and it is amazing what you learn from these people and the amount of distress and stress and pain their body goes through for them to perform. And when you start to meet these people, it's amazing that what you learn is that when they're right there ready to perform, they're usually not thinking very positive thoughts about winning the gold medal. They're thinking about, oh my God, how in the world did I get myself into this situation again? And their strategy typically for performance is to just start and not think. I mean, I have a very, very dear friend, very famous 400-meter hurdler who literally, she's the one who taught me about running that kind of distance. She said, listen, when I'm standing on the start line, no matter how big the event is, I'm going, why in the world did I decide to do this? I mean, this is really a difficult challenge. But her commitment is to run the first 100 meters, the best 100 of that 400 she possibly can, and then decide later if she wants to finish the other 300 meters. Now, there's wisdom in that strategy. There's wisdom to say, I'm going to get in my car for 10 minutes and I'm going to drive toward the university, and if after 10 minutes I don't want to go, I'll turn around and drive home. Because your odds of turning around and driving home, the odds of stopping after 100 meters of a 400-meter race are Buckley's and none. I mean, it's a very, very rare human being who could actually do something like that. So for me, this dreaded second event, the strategy is you've really got to not think, just start, and decide later, be it 1 minute later, 1 day later, 1 year later, if that's what it is you want to be doing.
So you're mentioning there an interesting phenomenon of the sort of power of momentum, that if we make a start, even if we kind of cheat ourselves and say, I'm just going to make a little bit of a start here, I'm just going to do this for a short time, there is a sort of inertia that takes over that'll carry us forward.
No question about it. No question. And when people say to me, you know, I don't always know what I want to do or how to do it, or I don't go to the gym because I don't know, it's like, well, go anyway, because in the process of going, you'll kind of figure that out. Many things in life you cannot figure out by sitting on the couch, and you can't figure out by talking about, and you can't figure out by thinking. You have to figure them out through the process of action. So for me, I'd rather have somebody start something not knowing even if it's good for them, not even knowing if they'll like it, because in the mere fact that they don't like it, their brain will start to think about the things they don't like, the things they do like, and they'll start having better information to make better decisions in the future.
So we've looked a lot at the internal challenges that we can overcome in the course of learning and changing our behavior. But then, even if we master all that, life happens.
It certainly does.
Things can intrude from the outside, and that can be as significant as an obstacle as all these more psychological issues we've addressed so far.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, you know, if you look at the kind of reasons and the rationale people give you for what they do and don't do, in some cases those rationalizations are literally excuses. Again, they're not excuses in the sense that they're bad. They're just the way the brain is trying to navigate getting you out of doing things that you don't like. But then you're right. There are realistic times when life does exert itself, and it exerts itself most intensely on our personal goals. We can have a goal to, read a book a week, and all of a sudden, we've got a week where we've got a child who's very ill or demanding a lot of attention, or we get guests in from out of town, or we get sent off on a project, or, invariably something happens. That's not the issue. Life will exert itself. I mean, it happens frequently enough that we should have a strategy to deal with that. And the strategy for dealing with life exerting itself is, number one, recognize it happens. Number two, recognize that life is very long and there's more than enough time to get things done. That missing a week of reading your book or getting to the gym is not a good enough reason to not pick it up when there's space again to do it. Setting the intention every day that you'll be back to it, even if it takes 3 years before it happens. I mean, I did that with the guitar. I mean, for years I just put it down. I didn't have anything else I was doing with it. So I knew someday, though, I'd want to get back to it. And I would just wake up every day with an intention that, maybe today would be the day that it fit back into my life. And, it didn't fit back in my life for a very long time. And just sure enough, one day I was finished with a project, I was taking time off, I was looking for some new things to do, and sure enough, with that little intention to always pick the guitar up, there it was. And from that day on, I started playing again. So these are the kind of things, recognize it does happen, recognize you have more than enough time. Losing a week or two or even a year is not significant in the scheme of never picking it up again and getting it forward in your life, and always having an intention that today might be the day it's back. It's never losing sight of that.
Let's talk a little bit about goal setting and goal getting. The aim of this program, in the largest sense, is to generate greater wealth and personal prosperity. That's an enormous goal. And even the subsections, like setting up a business or developing a successful corporate career, becoming a real estate investor, or mastering financial literacy, these are very large goals. And they could be a little overwhelming. How do we get specific? How do we make this manageable?
Yeah, it's interesting. First I'll just touch for a second on goal setting versus goal getting. I have very good distinctions between those. I have found in, working with, again, many adults, that they actually don't have too many issues with setting a goal. I mean, they kind of have ideas what they want to do. it's the achievement of the goal that's problematic. I mean, people go off on hundreds of different types of goal-setting courses, and they come away with nifty little day-timers or plans or ideas or cheat sheets or whatever it is, some sort of mechanism for setting their goals, but of course it doesn't get them out of bed to do anything. So, we have to keep remembering my focus is more on kind of the actions you have to take consistently and frequently. So maybe that's where we go with this, and that is that all large goals, let's say it this way, there's nothing you can do in a day or a week or a month. There's no amount of actions you can take in that short time that will do anything significant toward a big goal. So first you got to get off of thinking you can do anything big about anything you want to do today. So if you want to write a book and that's a goal, I'm sorry, you just cannot write a book in a day or a week or a month. So trying to do a lot at one time is usually a useless strategy. You burn out your own good energy and you fail. Wealth creation cannot be done in a day or a week or a month. It is probably to me, one of the longer term, almost boring activities. It's something you have to have a little teeny bit of attention on, a little teeny bit of action on every single day for a very long time to achieve. I mean, I think about wealth creation, my mind immediately goes back to the message I got as a kid that if I saved $1 a week until I was like my age I am today, that, I'd have a pretty good little nest egg there. Well, I don't know anyone in my generation that actually saved $1 a week for the hope that when they were 50, they would have a little nest egg. Now, I looked at that as part of my PhD research and said, why don't people save $1 a week? Even though it's true that if you do that from the time you're really young until the time you're 50, you got a little bit sitting in the bank to do something with. The reason is because saving $1 a week is boring. Who wants to save $1 a week? They'd rather go hope when they're 40 they're going to win the lottery or they're going to get a better job, or it's just not big enough, it's not exciting enough. So these longer term of this whole notion of wealth creation. One is people have got to get it grounded and recognize that it's going to take a little bit of a boring something every day for a long time in order to get where they want to go. If they're going to dive into this and don't make the goal so big and exciting that you got to do it in a month, you can't be even smart enough to think about this in a month's time. They're going to be listening in your program, in this program, to people who have spent their careers to know what they know. The wonderful thing about these people is they're willing to offer that, their knowledge, their hard-earned 30 years of experience to a whole new audience. But just because they're offering it doesn't mean that it takes a week or a day for you to learn it and then be able to go do something about it. So wealth creation for me is big. I think the key words for me are frequent and consistent. Can I wake up every day and take frequent and consistent action in the direction of my goal? Can I do one simple thing? I don't care if it's 1 minute more of reading. Is it 10 minutes more of listening to the audio CD? Is it getting on the phone one more time with somebody who's influential to me? Is it putting one more dollar in the bank? It's like, can I do one small microcosm of a thing every single day in the direction of my goal? If people get in the habit of doing one small thing a day, they will absolutely get where it is they want to go, be it in this context or any other context.
So when we talk about, in our subtitle of this program, the first 90 days, what we want to make clear here is don't expect to get massively wealthy in 90 days. Don't attempt to do everything that's referred to in this instructional audio in 90 days, but begin the habit of doing little pieces consistently and regularly.
Absolutely. If they could learn to do something every day for 90 days, and could they learn when life exerts itself and there's a week they can do nothing, but as soon as it's possible to do something again, they have a strategy to start? Can they learn to do things that perhaps are unpleasant for them? Like they might be a kind of person who'd rather be out there experiencing rather than sitting home reading. Well, too bad, so sad. Sometimes to be smart, you have to read. Sometimes to be smart, you have to listen to an audio. Sometimes to be smart, you have to be brave and take an action. All of us have different preferences. So you're right. The first 90 days is really setting up their mindset and their behavior and their willingness to be students over a long term, and then learning from those strategies to actually start to be able to take some steps that over time lead to viable wealth creation.
So in conclusion, Dr. Burns, can you give us some guidance as we approach the other components of this program and the teachings of our other presenters, Diane Kennedy, Jeff Burrows? Les Hewitt and Chris Lewis, Dorian Gallo and Dolph DeRoos. We're going to be listening to different presenters on different territories, and they're going to be introducing both information and specific action steps for us to take. What is your advice as we begin work on these other parts?
Yep, I think that's great. I mean, given the nature of the teaching devices you have, and those are audio CDs, and there's workbooks, and the workbook that has various activities. So those are your dominant teaching devices that are being used in this product. Therefore, people have to know how to get the best out of those devices, and it means that they have to bring with them kind of a mindset to be able to utilize those well. First, we have to recognize that listening to a CD or an audio CD one time through is great for entertainment, but it doesn't necessarily facilitate us remembering, learning, being reflective, connecting those ideas to things we already know, for example, and therefore, if we can't do those things, then we're going to have an awful time trying to use them. So my recommendation with the audio CDs is to be prepared to be listening to those more than one time, and certainly more than one time in different ways. I would absolutely imagine putting in an audio CD, sitting back in a comfortable, relaxed position, or maybe even in the car the first time, with the sole intention of simply becoming familiar with the sound of that presenter's voice, with the concepts and ideas, to start my own mind working about what are some of the things perhaps I already know about that. So the way I would kind of directionalize my brain the first pass would be to really focus on the question of, what's the general overview and concept that's being presented to me here, and in what ways do I already resonate with that content? Then I would plan and prepare to actually listen to the audio CD a second time. I would listen to it a second time, but this time in a position where I could actually hit a pause button, where I could actually stop and perhaps be more reflective or take notes, some key points that seem to stand out for me that I want to be reflective on. I might not even listen to the whole audio CD one time and study that way. I might simply commit to taking the first 10 minutes off somebody's audio CD and then take that in, and I might say for the next 3 or 4 days, those few concepts are what I'm going to be focusing on. I'm going to be reflecting on those. I'm going to talk about those in casual conversations when I'm having lunch with my colleagues. Then 3 or 4 days from now, I might take the second 10-minute slice or the second chapter on an audio CD. And I would really make a plan or map a way to, one, get a big overview, and then two, to actually go piece by piece through each of those audio CDs, and they need to be studied rigorously. That means studied, like you did in school. You didn't read a chapter in history or listen to the teacher talk and then go take a test and remember it. No, you went home and you studied and you reflected and you practiced, and that is going to be required for you to learn from the audio CDs. Fortunately, you have wonderful content experts here, but their job on the audio CD is simply to deliver you the best information possible. Your job must be to facilitate your own learning process from those audio CDs. They can't do that for you in that particular media. Of course, with the actual tasks and activities that you have, those take real-life experiences. And as you know or don't know, not all experiences lead to good quality learning. I know there's a line that says we learn from experience, but I'm sorry, too many people keep repeating the same experiences over and over again and not learning from them. The way we learn from experiences is when we focus our brain on what specifically we want to get out of the experience. So I would say virtually for each of the tasks that you're given, that you set some time to go do that task. But then you set the time to do that task more than once, maybe 3, 4, 5 different times, and each time what you're looking to do is see something in the experience you did not see the first time. Because one of the amazing things about learning, and if you've ever read a book or a magazine article, you'll notice this phenomena. The first time you scan through it, if you read through it, and then you say, okay, this is what I remember of what I've just read, you'll see that you have some small percentage of knowledge kind of still stuck there. If you now go read the same article again, it's amazing you don't see the same things you read the first time. You actually see things you missed the first time. It fills in the gaps. So with the audio CDs and with the tasks that you're going to do, I would highly recommend that you set up a schedule to revisit these, recognizing that learning is going to come in layers and it's going to get richer every time you revisit them. So if your goal is simply to be entertained and gather maybe 1 or 2 ideas, then you can throw that advice out. But if you're genuinely striving to learn new skills and knowledge such that you can head in a direction of wealth creation, that you really want to know this stuff, then set yourself up to be an excellent learner in that process. Make sure you choose a few successes first. You might pick tasks that kind of feel comfortable for you and resonate, but never forget the use of this, the materials that we've talked about here, and that is that by and large the majority of tasks, activities, listening assignments, studying, etc., are things that will be less than, the most fun thing to do on a Sunday afternoon. And so you want to have the best strategies available to sit down, get it done, and get out of there for the sake of your long-term success. I hope you've enjoyed what we've presented here on this tape. There's a lot here. This is definitely one of those things. I know if you never listen to this CD again and I were to give you a quiz in 4 days from now, you might remember 2% of it. That would be, you'd be being very good if you remembered 2% of it. And I'm very good for having created that. If you really want to know and utilize some of the ideas that we talked about, this is another CD that you'll need to revisit. You might do that after you've delved into some of the others for a while, but then come on back, have a listen. A lot of the things I've said here, you'll go, I wonder, did she say that the first time? I'm sure. And you'll get some nice evidence that I'm telling you the truth, that we just kind of keep filling in gaps and getting smarter as we go. Go well with your program. I wish you well. I certainly understand the goals that you have if you've purchased this product. And in any way we can help you out, we'll be glad to do it. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Stephanie Burns. Dr. Stephanie Burns has devoted her life to understanding human behavior, particularly in the fields of adult learning and goal achievement. She spent years in action as a trainer, speaker, and author, and then she directed her energies to academic research, earning a PhD in her chosen field. This work has provided completely new insights into why otherwise successful adults stop taking action on important goals. Goals like making money, getting healthy, or winning athletic competitions. Dr. Burns has applied her methodologies to an extraordinary range of activities, including corporate management, natural horsemanship, and learning musical instruments. She's the author of several books, including Great Lies We Live By, and most recently, Move Closer, Stay Longer, a breakthrough study of fear and courage. Dr. Stephanie Burns, we've invited you to provide this essential piece in our program, which we're calling the Mindset for Success, because of your pioneering work in the research and the teachings around human behavior, learning, and goal achievement. Can you tell us first a little bit about that work and your background in this subject area?
I think there's been a long thread that's been going on in my life, certainly for over the last 30 years, that has always seemed to focus on how it is adults get where it is they say they want to go. Now, for me, I wasn't an outstanding learner in school. I was the kid who was typically bored, sitting in class taking copious amounts of notes that never made any sense. I was more the kid who wanted to be very active in learning. And so for me, when I came out of high school, the first thought I had was wanting to be a computer engineer, but I did not want to go sit for 4 or 6 more years in a university taking more notes, listening to lectures that didn't make any sense. So I looked for an alternative, and I actually started in the United States Army at 18 years old, being trained as a computer engineer. And in those days, very few women were accepted into the engineering fields. I was lucky. And what was unique about that learning experience for me that kind of probably set me on the whole path I'm on today is that for the very first time I was in a learning environment that supported my style of learning. Yes, there was time for sitting still and taking notes, but soon enough they'd say, why don't you get up? There's a computer over there. Tear it apart, put it back together again with 5 less pieces, And so for me, for the first time as a learner, I could get out of my chair, talk out loud. I could actively experiment. And the result of that was for the very first time in school, I graduated #1 in my class. Business book they buy. So they buy it with enthusiasm and excitement. They're all excited about the end goal that they may get. But of course, they open the page, and once they realize the action they have to take, everything falls apart. And there's some very good science and biological reasons why adults procrastinate and avoid action. And one of the things that can be done is you can use someone like me to get people better prepared to be able to take advantage of the programs that you offer. So wealth creation, to me, requires knowledge, new knowledge. That means your brain has to know things it doesn't know now. And it also has to be able to do new things that it can't do now. And for me, the measure that learning has occurred, which is, a benchmark in my world, but very rarely a benchmark in any programs I've seen out there in this area, is #1, that the student can, at the end, talk about it articulately in a casual conversation. How you know you've learned something is if you can sit around the dinner table and talk about those concepts and ideas, again, articulately and casually, without notes and without having to think. That's how deep the knowledge learning has to be. And skills have to be installed so deeply that you can execute them without thinking, that there's been a genuine change in behavior. So for me, with wealth creation being skill-based and knowledge-based, this product's promise is that people will leave having studied it intelligently as a good adult learner, effectively as an adult learner, such that they own the knowledge in a way that they can talk about it casually and they can genuinely use it in their everyday behavior without having to think about it.
It's striking to me that the special focus of Trump University, with the guidance of Professor Roger Schank as the Chief Learning Officer, is what we call learning by doing. And it seems that what you're saying is that it's in the doing area that learning often breaks down. Why is this? Why is it that we will buy a tape set like this or a CD set, or we'll read a book, we'll get excited, we'll see the vision, but then we fail to really follow through? What's going on here?
Well, that's an interesting human behavior question, and it's actually what drove me to do my PhD. Here's a little setup for this, and then I'll give you an idea of the kinds of things that cause this breakdown to happen quite naturally. When I was teaching people how to learn more effectively, my assumption, an almost naive assumption, was that if you gave people skills to be effective learners, such that, of course, if they have a question, they don't want to raise their hand and ask because they don't want to be embarrassed in front of their peers or colleagues. So the ABC experience for me was absolutely critical. It opened my eyes to how ill-prepared adults are to go back into learning situations and take advantage of those. After that experience, I spent the next 4 years doing research in the area of human behavior, specifically focused on adult learning and motivation, also in the area of achievement. As a result of that, I started to test some methods and started to teach or re-educate adults into how to be more effective learners when they went back into learning situations, be those self-directed, things they were doing at home on their own, or back in formal classrooms. And for the last 15 or 20 years now, that work has been dominant in my life. I've continued to do research. I went off and did a PhD to solve some of the more difficult problems that I was encountering with adult learners. And so today I would be seen as someone who gets brought into organizations or into schools who has a high stake in the quality of learning that they're offering to their people. And so they may have excellent information, excellent content, but what is oftentimes missing is quality facilitation, be that facilitation being wrapped around, as we're doing here with an audio CD, or some sort of online facilitation event, or something face-to-face, but something that prepares the adult for what it is they're about to engage in so that they get and are able to take the best advantage. So that's a little bit about me. I've worked with hundreds of organizations doing this type of work in many different media, and I'm just happy to be here to be able to do that for this project now.
Thanks. Can you give me a couple of examples of how your methodologies have changed the results that people have obtained from their learning experiences?
Well, I mean, I suppose I can give you one now. I'm working with a very large organization dealing with natural horsemanship. They're a worldwide company. They have hundreds of thousands of students who want and desire to study natural horsemanship under the leader, Pat Pirelli. And, of course, this difficult situation is that, Pat has brilliant material around natural horsemanship, but his ability then to produce an educational program that actually facilitates that year-long, 2-year-long, 3-year-long learning process for someone who's sitting in their home who's got a horse out in the paddock was highly problematic. So someone like me comes in, and rather than having things like 100,000 people buy a homeschool program and only 15 or 20% actually completing it, now they're getting completion rates that, are above 90% simply because the learner is prepared and facilitated along the way. And this would be done for many, many organizations, be it leadership training, sales training, very task-oriented training, such as, reskilling on the computers. I worked with the banks down in Australia, where I've just come up from, getting them to get computer literacy or literacy with the Internet and really comfortable facilities for people. They had lots of courses to teach people about computers and technology, but the result oftentimes was that people were really not using it. They were abandoning the courses very early on. And even, I'll tell you what, some of the online courses that are there now in the e-learning area, the uptake of e-learning around the world has been very high, but the completion rates for learners is very low. I've just finished a contract with a client who bought a large number of licenses to skill their people with e-learning programs. The result was only 4% completion. And so my job, what I was brought in to do, was to prepare learners to be able to learn in an e-learning environment such that they could take better advantage of what it was they were being offered. So my work is so broad spectrum and spread across such a diverse range of clients and diverse interests that it's very hard to say this is the particular niche. It's almost any single person or group or organization who wants to see people legitimately learn, legitimately take away what it is they're offering as information and use it in their lives is likely someone who's going to give me a call at one point or another.
There are many skills required, of course, for wealth creation, both internal and external, that will be presented on this program. Why do we need this kind of preparation first? Why not get straight to the meat and potatoes of how to make money?
Well, I think, the proof's in the pudding. I mean, there are how many books and programs and products already on the market that deal with wealth creation, and yet we don't see a lot of people actively being able to uptake that knowledge and those skills in such a way that they're able to utilize it out in the marketplace. One of the things that intrigued me about this new program was the willingness of its producers to actually care about whether people heard the messages from those content experts, actually were able to study that material appropriately and rigorously in such a way that they could then be compelled to take action when they were back out in real-world situations. So I'm all for, people diving in and buying books. I mean, you have to get that the average adult in business today reads 11 or 12 pages of any given. Now, in the military here in America, when you graduate number one in your class, oftentimes what happens is they make you a military instructor. So for me, becoming an instructor certainly wasn't on the path, and certainly working with adult learners was not necessarily something I had planned for, but by circumstance I was there. And the circumstance of the military probably sets the entire stage for how I've dealt with adult learners ever since. My first class of students were 40 men. Every single one of the men outranked me. They were all older than I was, and obviously they were physically much larger. So, of course, when a student would raise his hand and say, "Excuse me, Corporal Burns, but I don't know what that means, or I'm confused," well, I couldn't do what I'd seen my teachers do. I couldn't say things like, "Well, of course someone like you is going to be confused," or "If you'd stop talking in class," or "If you'd do your homework." See, I couldn't do any of those things. I had to stand at attention, salute the student, go to parade rest and say, "Well, excuse me, could you tell me what I did personally to cause your confusion?" Now, when you ask a student what causes their confusion, interestingly, they tell you. And what I learned at 19 years old was that with adult learners, if you gave it to them another way with a different metaphor or example, presented it differently, invariably their confusion went away. And the result for me was learning that oftentimes adults come into classroom situations with skills as learners that are not necessarily adequate to support themselves, and if they don't get the support from the teacher or facilitator, then there's no hope. And there's a tremendous amount of failure with adults as learners in formal classrooms and informal study simply because they either aren't skilled themselves and they're not facilitated or prepared properly themselves. So for me, the Army was a very big movement. I went out and I became an engineer for many companies, but I then ended up at ABC Television in the early 80s, and I stood in front of a group. I'd been asked to teach computer literacy, and I thought, well, how easy could this be? I mean, this is only computer literacy. But what I confronted were a large number of senior managers there to learn to use technology, and I had an assumption that if you take otherwise smart, successful adults, which most people are who do learning courses like the one we're talking about, that they'll behave like smart learners in the classroom environment. I expected they'd raise a hand and ask a question, that they would take notes appropriately and properly, they would study well and rigorously. But of course what I found was that when you take otherwise successful adults, put them in a classroom, and ask them to learn, what they tend to do is they go back and behave like they were 6 or 7 years old in school. They rock on their chairs, they go to the bathroom 9 times more than it's physically possible to have to do.